The morning sun cast long shadows across the cracked asphalt of Route 287, where the last stop gas station sat like a forgotten outpost between civilization and nowhere. The weathered sign creaked in the desert wind, its faded red letters promising fuel, food, and cold drinks to anyone brave enough to venture this far into the wasteland of eastern Nevada. Most travelers used it as exactly what its name suggested, a final chance to fill up before the long stretch of empty highway that led to the California border. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus Wheeler pulled his dusty pickup truck alongside Pump. Number 3, the engine's diesel rumble finally falling silent after 8 straight hours of driving. He sat behind the wheel for a moment, his calloused hands still gripping the steering wheel as he watched the heat waves dance across the pavement. At 52, Marcus carried himself with the quiet dignity of a man who had seen too much but never complained about it. His graying beard was neatly trimmed, his flannel shirt rolled up to reveal forearms marked with scars that told stories he rarely shared. The gas station itself looked like it had been frozen in time somewhere around 1985. The buildings white, painted long since surrendered to the elements, leaving behind a patchwork of sun-bleached walls and rust stains that ran down from the gutters like tears. A single fluorescent light flickered inside the attached convenience store, casting an uneven glow over shelves stocked with basic necessities and overpriced snacks. Marcus stepped out of his truck, his worn combat boots hitting the pavement with the solid thud of a man who knew how to carry his weight. He moved with economy, no wasted motion, each step deliberate and measured. The kind of walk that came from 23 years in the army, from deployments in places where walking carelessly could get you killed. He unscrewed his gas cap and began the familiar ritual of fueling up, his eyes automatically scanning the surrounding area out of habit. The parking lot was mostly empty, except for a rusted sedan that looked like it hadn't run in years, and a motorcycle parked near the store entrance. The bike was a massive Harley-Davidson, chrome gleaming despite the desert dust, with custom paintwork that probably cost more than most people made in a month. Saddlebags hung heavy on either side, and a leather jacket was draped across the seat, studs and patches covering every available inch of material. The owner of the bike emerged from the store just as Marcus was topping off his tank. The man was built like a bear, easily 6'4", and weighing close to 300 pounds, most of it muscle that had been earned through years of hard living rather than gym memberships. His arms were covered in tattoos that told the story of a life lived on the margins, skulls, flames, and words in languages Marcus recognized from his time overseas. A thick beard hung down to his chest, and his eyes held the cold calculation of someone who had learned early that intimidation was often more effective than conversation. The biker's name was Kyle Bradshaw, though the patch on his jacket identified him as Crusher to anyone in his circle. He had spent the better part of 2 decades building a reputation as someone you didn't cross. Someone whose word was law in the small network of motorcycle clubs that operated in the shadow spaces between legitimate society and outright criminality. He had done time, both in county lockup and state prison, and each stint had only added to his credibility on the street. Kyle stopped at his bike and made a show of checking his saddlebags, but his attention was fixed on Marcus. There was something about the older man that rubbed him the wrong way. The confident posture, the way he moved like he owned whatever space he occupied, the complete lack of deference that Kyle had come to expect from civilians. In Kyle's world, respect was earned through fear, and this grey-haired stranger in the pickup truck wasn't showing the proper amount of either. Marcus finished fueling up and headed into the store to pay, completely unaware that he had attracted unwanted attention. The bell above the door chimed as he entered, and he nodded politely to the clerk behind the counter, a teenage girl with purple hair and tired eyes who looked like she would rather be anywhere else in the world. Her name tag read Casey, and she managed a small smile in return, the kind of automatic response that came from years of customer service training. The store's interior was cramped and cluttered, with narrow aisles that forced customers to turn sideways when passing each other. The air conditioning unit wheezed and struggled against the desert heat, managing to keep the temperature just barely tolerable. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a harsh, unflattering glow that made the cheap merchandise look even cheaper. Marcus grabbed a bottle of water from the cooler and a bag of beef jerky from the snack aisle, basic road food that would keep him going until he reached his destination. He'd been driving since before dawn, making his way from his small apartment in Reno to a job interview in Los Angeles. At his age, finding work wasn't easy, especially for someone whose primary skills involved things that didn't translate well to civilian life. But he had heard about an opening at a Veterans Outreach Center, helping other former soldiers navigate the transition back to civilian life, and it seemed like something he could actually make a difference doing. The job interview was important to him in ways that went beyond just needing employment. After leaving the service, Marcus had struggled with the same demons that plagued so many veterans, a sense of purposelessness, the difficulty of forming connections with people who had never experienced the intensity of military life, the constant feeling that he was playing a role rather than actually living. He had drifted from job to job, from town to town, never quite finding his place in a world that seemed to operate by rules he didn't fully understand. Behind him, the door chimed again as Kyle entered the store. The biker's presence immediately changed the atmosphere, his bulk filling the narrow aisles and his heavy boots echoing off the linoleum floor. Casey's smile faded, replaced by the wary expression of someone who had learned to recognize trouble when it walked through her door. She had been working at the last stop for 3 years, ever since dropping out of high school, and she had seen her share of difficult customers. Kyle made his way to the beer cooler, deliberately taking his time and making as much noise as possible. He grabbed a 6-pack of the most expensive beer in stock, then proceeded to knock over a display of candy bars as he turned around. The colorful packages scattered across the floor, and he made no move to pick them up or apologize. Marcus glanced over at the commotion, but said nothing, continuing to browse the limited selection of travel necessities. He had learned long ago to pick his battles carefully, and a clumsy customer in a gas station convenience store didn't rise to the level of intervention. He selected a small bottle of aspirin and a pack of gum, then made his way to the counter. Where Casey was waiting with obvious anxiety, the girl's hands shook slightly as she rang up Marcus's purchases, her eyes darting between him and Kyle, who was now standing directly behind him in line. The biker was close enough that Marcus could smell the mixture of motor oil, leather, and stale beer that seemed to be his personal cologne. Kyle was deliberately invading his personal space, a classic intimidation tactic that Marcus recognized. From his military training, "That'll be $12.50, Casey said, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus pulled out his wallet and handed her a $20 bill, his movements calm and controlled despite the tension that was building in the small space. He could feel Kyle's eyes on him, studying him, looking for signs of weakness or fear. It was a familiar dynamic, one that Marcus had encountered countless times in various forms throughout his life. Kyle cleared his throat loudly and shifted his weight from foot to foot, making it clear that he felt Marcus was taking too long. The biker's impatience was performative, designed to create pressure and discomfort. When Marcus didn't react, Kyle decided to escalate. "Some people act like they got all day," Kyle said, his voice carrying the kind of false joviality that barely concealed the threat underneath. "Must be nice to not have anywhere important to be." Marcus accepted his change from Casey and pocketed his receipt without responding to Kyle's comment. He had no interest in engaging with someone who was clearly looking for a confrontation. Years of military service had taught him the value of de-escalation, of walking away from fights that didn't need to happen. But Kyle wasn't finished. As Marcus turned to leave, the biker stepped sideways, partially blocking the narrow aisle between the counter and the door. It wasn't a complete obstruction, but it forced Marcus to either squeeze past him or ask him to move. Both options would require some form of interaction, which was exactly what Kyle wanted. "Excuse me," Marcus said simply, his tone neutral and polite. Kyle made a show of looking around the store as if he hadn't heard, then slowly moved aside just enough to let Marcus pass. But as the older man stepped by, Kyle's shoulder bumped into his, hard enough to be clearly intentional, but light enough to maintain plausible deniability. Marcus paused for just a moment, his military training kicking in as his mind automatically assessed the threat level and potential responses. Kyle was bigger and younger, but Marcus had advantages that weren't immediately visible: speed, training, and the kind of controlled aggression that came from professional combat experience. Still, this wasn't worth fighting over. Not yet. He continued toward the door, pushing it open and stepping back into the desert heat. Behind him, he could hear Kyle's booming laugh and Casey's nervous attempt to process the biker's beer purchase. Marcus walked to his truck and climbed behind the wheel, his mind already moving on from the encounter, but Kyle wasn't ready to let it go. As Marcus started his engine, the biker emerged from the store and mounted his Harley. The motorcycle roared to life with a sound that could probably be heard for miles in any direction, a deliberate display of power and intimidation. Kyle revved the engine several times, sending clouds of exhaust into the air and making conversation impossible for anyone within 50 yards. Marcus pulled away from the pump and headed toward the exit, but Kyle had positioned his bike to block the most direct route to the highway. The biker was now wearing his leather jacket, and Marcus could see the patches that identified him as a member of the Desert Reapers Motorcycle Club, an organization that Marcus vaguely remembered hearing about in connection with drug trafficking and violent crime. The situation was escalating beyond what could reasonably be called an accident or misunderstanding. Kyle was making a deliberate choice to continue the confrontation, probably as much for his own entertainment as for any perceived slight. Marcus had encountered men like this before, bullies who had learned that most people would back down rather than risk a physical confrontation. Kyle guided his motorcycle alongside Marcus's truck as they both approached the highway entrance, the Harley's engine rumbling like controlled thunder. Through his open window, Marcus could see the biker's face, twisted into an ugly grin that suggested he was enjoying the game. Kyle raised his voice to be heard over the engine noise. "Hey, old man, you forget how to drive, or are you just scared of real machines?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Marcus kept his eyes on the road and his hands on the wheel, refusing to be drawn into whatever Kyle was trying to start. He had learned in the army that the best way to deal with bullies was often to simply not give them the reaction they were looking for. But Kyle was persistent, and he had apparently decided that Marcus's lack of response was a sign of weakness rather than wisdom. The biker pulled ahead slightly, then swerved his motorcycle closer to the truck's passenger side, close enough that Marcus could see the details of the skull tattoo that covered most of Kyle's left forearm. It was a dangerous maneuver on a two-lane highway, one that could easily result in a serious accident if Marcus made any sudden movements. For the first time since the encounter began, Marcus felt his carefully controlled temper beginning to stir. He had been patient, polite, and completely non-confrontational, but Kyle seemed determined to push the situation past the point where it could be safely ignored. The veteran's training kicked in, and he began to mentally prepare for the possibility that this might not end with both of them simply going their separate ways. Kyle's motorcycle suddenly accelerated, pulling ahead of the truck, and then cutting sharply back into Marcus's lane. The maneuver forced Marcus to brake hard to avoid a collision, his truck's tires squealing against the hot asphalt. In his rearview mirror, Marcus could see that Kyle was laughing, clearly delighted with his ability to control the situation. The desert highway stretched endlessly in both directions, empty except for the two vehicles and the vast expanse of sand and scrub brush that defined this part of Nevada. There were no witnesses, no police, no possibility of help if the situation continued to deteriorate. Marcus realized that Kyle had probably chosen this location deliberately, knowing that he could escalate things without worrying about outside interference. Kyle slowed down again, this time pulling alongside the driver's side of Marcus's truck. The biker was close enough now that Marcus could see the network of scars that covered his knuckles, evidence of countless fights that had probably all ended with Kyle as the victor. The bigger man was clearly experienced in violence, comfortable with it in a way that suggested it was a regular part of his life. "Pull over, Grandpa," Kyle shouted over the engine noise. "Let's have a conversation about road manners." Marcus continued driving, his mind working through the tactical situation. Kyle was operating from a position of assumed superiority, confident that his size and reputation would be enough to intimidate any random civilian he encountered. The biker had no way of knowing that the gray-haired man in the pickup truck had spent more than 2 decades learning how to fight and kill professionally, that he had survived situations that would have broken most people. But Marcus also knew that his military training came with responsibilities. The skills he had learned were meant to be used in defense of his country and his fellow soldiers, not in roadside disputes with civilian criminals. The rules of engagement were different here, and the consequences of violence would be measured not in mission success, but in legal liability and moral compromise. Kyle's patience was wearing thin. The game of intimidation wasn't producing the results he expected, and Marcus's refusal to engage was beginning to feel like a challenge to his authority. In Kyle's world, respect was a zero-sum game. Every moment that Marcus failed to show fear or submission was a moment that Kyle's reputation was being diminished. The biker made his decision. He gunned his motorcycle forward, then cut sharply in front of Marcus's truck and hit his brakes. The maneuver was designed to force a confrontation, to make it impossible for Marcus to continue avoiding the situation. But Kyle had underestimated his target in ways that would soon become apparent. Marcus's response was immediate and professional. Instead of braking hard and potentially losing control, he smoothly changed lanes and accelerated past the motorcycle, his truck's diesel engine providing more than enough power to outrun the Harley on a straight highway. The maneuver was executed with the kind of calm precision that came from years of tactical driving training, and it left Kyle sitting in a cloud of diesel exhaust, his carefully planned ambush completely neutralized. For a moment, Kyle was too surprised to react. In his experience, civilians either cowered or made angry, poorly planned attempts to fight back. This calculated professional response was something entirely outside his frame of reference. But surprise quickly gave way to rage, and Kyle twisted the throttle on his Harley, sending the motorcycle rocketing forward in pursuit of the truck. The chase was brief, but intense. Kyle's Harley was fast, but Marcus's truck had the advantage of weight and momentum. More importantly, Marcus was driving with the kind of tactical awareness that Kyle couldn't match, constantly checking his mirrors, anticipating potential maneuvers, thinking several moves ahead in the deadly game they were now playing. Kyle managed to pull alongside the truck again, this time on the passenger side. But instead of trying to force Marcus off the road, He reached into his jacket and pulled out something that changed the entire nature of the confrontation. The chrome-plated pistol gleamed in the desert sun, and Kyle waved it in Marcus's direction. While trying to control his motorcycle with one hand, Marcus saw the gun and felt something shift inside him, a switch that had been installed during his first deployment and had never been completely turned off. The situation had just crossed the line from harassment to assault with a deadly weapon, and the rules of engagement had fundamentally changed. Kyle had escalated the confrontation to a level where Marcus's military training not only applied, but demanded a response. The veteran's mind went cold and analytical, processing the threat and calculating responses with the speed and precision that had kept him alive through multiple combat deployments. Kyle was operating a motorcycle while holding a weapon, which meant his ability to aim accurately was severely compromised. The biker was also clearly inexperienced with tactical situations, as evidenced by his decision to reveal his weapon before he was in position to use it effectively. Marcus made his choice. Instead of continuing to flee or attempting to de-escalate, he suddenly cut the wheel hard to the right, sending his truck directly toward Kyle's motorcycle. The maneuver was calculated and precise, designed to force the biker to choose between maintaining his aggressive position or taking evasive action. Kyle's eyes went wide as 2 tons of pickup truck suddenly filled his vision. His bravado evaporated. In an instant, replaced by the primal fear of imminent death, he yanked his handlebars hard to the right, sending his Harley into a barely controlled skid toward the shoulder of the highway. The motorcycle's rear wheel lost traction on the loose gravel, and Kyle fought desperately to maintain control as his bike wobbled and weaved. Marcus straightened his truck and continued down the highway, watching in his mirrors as Kyle struggled to bring his motorcycle to a stop without crashing. The biker eventually managed to regain control, but he was now sitting on the shoulder of the road, his bike's engine stalled and his hands shaking from the adrenaline surge. For several long minutes, Kyle sat motionless on his motorcycle, trying to process what had just happened. He'd gone from being the predator to being the prey in a matter of seconds, and the experience had shaken him more than he wanted to admit. The gray-haired man in the pickup truck had just demonstrated a level of controlled aggression that Kyle recognized but had never expected to encounter from a random civilian. Marcus, meanwhile, continued driving toward his destination, his pulse steady and his expression calm. The incident had activated instincts and training that he rarely had occasion to use in civilian life, but he felt no satisfaction in having intimidated Kyle. If anything, he was disappointed that the situation had escalated as far as it had. Violence, even threatened violence, was a tool of last resort, and he would have preferred to resolve the conflict without having to demonstrate his capabilities. But Kyle Bradshaw wasn't the type of man who learned from experience, at least not the kind of experience that involved backing down from a fight. As Marcus's truck disappeared over a hill in the distance, the biker restarted his motorcycle and began planning his revenge. He had been humiliated, and in his world, humiliation demanded a response. Kyle pulled out his cell phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found the number he was looking for. When the call connected, his voice was tight with barely controlled rage. "Snake? It's Crusher. I need some backup out on 287. Some old bastard just tried to run me off the road, and I think it's time we taught him some manners." The Desert Reaper's clubhouse sat 20 miles south of the highway confrontation, nestled in the valley between 2 rocky outcroppings that provided natural concealment from prying eyes. The compound consisted of a main building that had once been a ranch house, surrounded by several smaller structures that served various purposes in the club's operations. A chain-link fence, topped with razor wire, surrounded the entire property, and cameras mounted on tall poles provided surveillance coverage of all approaches. Inside the main building, 5 men sat around a scarred wooden table that had seen decades of use in planning operations that existed in the grey areas between legal and illegal. The air was thick with cigarette smoke and the underlying tension that came from men who lived by violence and respected nothing else. Empty beer bottles covered most of the table's surface, and a deck of cards lay scattered where someone had abandoned a poker game in favor of more pressing business. Thomas "Snake" Castellanos ended Kyle's phone call and looked around the table at his assembled brothers. At 45, Snake was the Desert Reapers' president, a position he had earned through a combination of strategic thinking and ruthless elimination of rivals. His lean frame carried the kind of wiry strength that came from years of hard living, and his arms were covered in tattoos that chronicled both his time in the club and his earlier career as a small-time criminal. "Crusher's got himself in a situation," Snake announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Some civilian gave him trouble on the highway, and he wants backup to handle it proper." The other men around the table exchanged glances that mixed amusement with anticipation. Kyle's reputation for finding trouble was well established within the club, but he was also one of their most reliable enforcers when situations required a heavy hand. If he was calling for backup, it meant the situation had escalated beyond what he felt comfortable handling alone. "What kind of trouble?" asked Bobby Diesel Morrison, a massive man whose nickname came from his ability to consume enormous quantities of alcohol without apparent effect. At 320 pounds, Diesel was the club's primary muscle, the man they sent when intimidation needed to be backed up with the credible threat of serious physical harm. Snake lit a fresh cigarette and took a long drag before answering. "Says some old guy in a pickup tried to run him off the road, pulled a gun on him and everything. Crusher wants to teach him some respect." The third man at the table, Jimmy "Wrench" Kowalski, laughed and shook his head. Jimmy had earned his nickname through his skill with tools, both mechanical and human. He was the club's primary mechanic and weapons specialist, responsible for maintaining their motorcycles and ensuring that their various enterprises had the technical support they needed. "Crusher got shown up by some random civilian?" Jimmy asked, clearly enjoying his brother's discomfort. "Must be losing his touch." "Watch your mouth," warned Rico Blade Valdez, Kyle's closest friend within the club. Rico had spent 8 years in state prison for aggravated assault, and his loyalty to Kyle was absolute. The two men had known each other since childhood, growing up in the same rough neighborhood where joining a gang was often the only path to protection and respect. The fifth man at the table remained silent, but his presence commanded attention despite his lack of participation in the conversation. Vincent "Ghost" Sullivan was the club's enforcer, the man they called when situations required finality rather than negotiation. His pale skin and white hair had earned him his nickname, but it was his ability to eliminate problems without leaving. Evidence that made him truly valuable to the organization. Snake stubbed out his cigarette and stood up, his decision made. "We ride out there and back up our brother. Crusher might be an idiot sometimes, but he's our idiot. Can't have civilians thinking they can push Desert Reapers around without consequences." The men began gathering their gear with the efficiency of a military unit preparing for deployment. Leather jackets were donned, weapons were checked and concealed, and motorcycles were fired up in the compound's courtyard. Within 15 minutes, 4 Harley-Davidsons roared out of the compound and onto the desert highway, their riders bent on delivering the kind of lesson that would ensure no one else made the mistake of challenging their authority. Meanwhile, Marcus Wheeler continued his journey toward Los Angeles, unaware that his brief confrontation with Kyle had attracted the attention of an entire motorcycle club. The veteran was lost in thought, his mind processing the incident and trying to understand why a simple gas station stop had escalated into a roadside confrontation. In his experience, most bullies backed down when faced with genuine resistance, but Kyle had seemed almost eager to escalate the situation. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, a ribbon of black asphalt cutting through the landscape that looked like the surface of an alien planet. Joshua trees dotted the desert floor like twisted sentinels, their bizarre silhouettes creating shadows that shifted and changed as the sun moved across the sky. The temperature gauge on Marcus's dashboard showed it was already over 100 degrees outside, and the day was still young. Marcus's thoughts drifted to the job interview that awaited him in Los Angeles. The position was with the Veterans Transition Center, a non-profit organization that helped former military personnel adjust to civilian life. The work would involve counseling, job placement assistance, and crisis intervention, exactly the kind of meaningful employment that Marcus had been searching for since leaving the army. The interview was scheduled for the following morning, which gave him time to find a motel room and prepare his presentation. He had spent weeks researching the organization and practicing his responses to likely interview questions. At his age, he couldn't afford to waste opportunities, and this position felt like it could be the fresh start he desperately needed. His military pension provided basic financial security, but Marcus needed more than just money. He needed purpose, a sense that his skills and experience were being put to productive use. Too many veterans struggled with the transition to civilian life, and Marcus believed he could make a difference in helping them navigate the challenges he had faced himself. Radio in his truck crackled with static as he passed through an area of poor reception, and Marcus adjusted the tuning to find a clearer station. Country music filled the cab, the familiar melodies providing a soundtrack for his journey through the desert. He had always found something comforting about country music's honest portrayal of life's struggles and small victories. Behind him, miles away, but closing the distance rapidly, Kyle Bradshaw rode his Harley with renewed confidence. The arrival of his club brothers had restored his sense of superiority and erased the humiliation he had felt during his encounter with Marcus. The Desert Reapers were known throughout this part of Nevada for their willingness to use violence to settle disputes, and Kyle was eager to demonstrate their power to the veteran who had dared to challenge him. The pursuit was methodical rather than reckless. Snake had insisted on a coordinated approach that would give them maximum advantage when they caught up with their target. The 5 motorcycles rode in a loose formation, staying just close enough to maintain visual contact while avoiding the appearance of an organized convoy that might attract unwanted attention from law enforcement. Snake's motorcycle took the lead. Position, his years of experience allowing him to read the road conditions and traffic patterns with professional skill. He had been riding for over 25 years, starting with stolen bikes in his teenage years and progressing to the custom Harley that now carried him across the desert. His bike was equipped with a police scanner that monitored law enforcement communications, ensuring that they would have advance warning if their activities attracted official attention. Diesel rode to Snake's right, his massive frame making his motorcycle look almost comically small, despite its impressive size. His bike was modified for power rather than comfort, with a supercharged engine that could outrun most police motorcycles in a straight-line pursuit. Diesel's role in any confrontation would be to provide overwhelming physical presence, using his size and strength to intimidate opponents into submission. Jimmy and Rico flanked the formation, their motorcycles equipped with saddlebags that contained various tools and weapons that might prove useful in the coming confrontation. Both men were veterans of dozens of similar operations, and they rode with the calm confidence of professionals who understood their roles and capabilities. Ghost brought up the rear, his pale eyes constantly scanning the surrounding terrain for potential threats or opportunities. His motorcycle was the quietest of the group, modified with special exhaust systems that reduced its acoustic signature. Ghost's specialty was approaching targets without being detected, and his position in the formation reflected his preference for operating from the shadows. The desert landscape provided excellent visibility for miles in every direction, and it wasn't long before the bikers spotted Marcus's pickup truck in the distance. The vehicle was maintaining a steady speed and staying in the right lane, giving no indication that its driver was aware of the pursuit. Snake signaled for his men to close the distance, and the 5 motorcycles accelerated in unison. Marcus first became aware of the approaching motorcycles when he spotted them in his rear-view mirror, still several miles behind, but clearly gaining ground. At first, he assumed they were simply other travelers taking advantage of the empty highway to make good time. But as they drew closer, something about their formation and purposeful approach triggered his tactical instincts. The veteran began paying closer attention to his mirrors, noting the way the motorcycles maintained their relative positions and the aggressive manner in which they were closing the distance. His military training had taught him to recognize coordinated movement, and what he was seeing looked more like a tactical approach than casual highway travel. When the lead motorcycle pulled alongside his truck and Snake's face became visible beneath his helmet, Marcus felt his suspicions confirmed. The man's expression was cold and calculating, and the way he maintained eye contact while matching the truck's speed suggested hostile intent. Marcus had seen that look before, in the faces of enemy combatants who were preparing to engage American forces. Snake raised his left hand and made a cutting motion across his throat, the universal gesture for "you're dead." Then he pointed toward the shoulder of the highway, clearly indicating that he wanted Marcus to pull over. The message was unmistakable: stop the truck and submit to whatever the bikers had planned, or face the consequences of continued resistance. Marcus's response was immediate and tactical. Instead of complying with Snake's demand, he downshifted his truck and accelerated, using the diesel engine's torque to pull ahead of the lead motorcycle. His mind was already working through the strategic situation, analyzing the terrain and calculating his options for dealing with multiple hostile contacts. The highway ahead curved through a series of low hills that would provide temporary concealment from the pursuing motorcycles. Marcus knew that his truck's superior weight and power would give him an advantage on the uphill sections, while the bikers' maneuverability would serve them better on curves and downhill stretches. The key would be using the terrain to his advantage, while avoiding situations where they could surround him. Snake's voice crackled over the radio headsets that connected the Desert Reapers. "Targets running. Close formation and box him in. Diesel, take the left flank. Ghost, swing wide right and get ahead of him. Jimmy and Rico, stay on my 6 and be ready to move." The motorcycles spread out according to Snake's orders, their riders executing the maneuver with the precision of a military unit. This wasn't their first highway pursuit, and each man knew his role in the coordinated attack they were about to unleash. The empty desert highway had become a battleground, and both sides were preparing for a confrontation that would test their skills, resolve, and willingness to use violence. Marcus crested the first hill and spotted a rest area about 2 miles ahead, marked by a cluster of picnic tables and a small parking lot. The location would provide him with options for maneuvering and potentially using the fixed structures as cover or obstacles. More importantly, it would force the bikers to approach him across open ground, where his military training would give him the maximum tactical advantage. He made his decision and began preparing for what was about to become the most dangerous situation he had faced since leaving the army. The peaceful desert morning was about to explode into violence. And Marcus Wheeler was ready to remind the Desert Reapers why messing with the wrong veteran was a mistake they would never forget. The rest area appeared ahead, like an oasis in the desert, its weathered picnic tables and cracked concrete pad, offering the only break in the endless expanse of sand and scrub brush. Marcus guided his truck off the highway and into the parking area, his trained eyes automatically cataloging the tactical features of the terrain. 3 concrete picnic tables provided potential cover, a small restroom building offered concealment, and scattered Joshua trees created natural obstacles that could channel an attacker's approach. Behind him, the 5 motorcycles of the Desert Reapers closed the distance with predatory intent, their engines roaring like mechanical beasts hungry for confrontation. Snake's hand signals directed his men into position as they entered the rest area, spreading out to prevent their target from escaping, while maintaining enough distance to avoid giving him any advantage in close combat. Marcus stepped out of his truck and walked calmly toward the center of the parking area, his movements deliberate and controlled. To the approaching bikers, he might have looked like a man preparing to surrender, but his positioning was actually a calculated tactical decision that would give him maximum freedom of movement and clear sight lines in all directions. The Desert Reapers dismounted from their motorcycles in unison, their boots hitting the concrete with the solid sound of men who were accustomed to violence and confident in their ability to deliver it. Kyle arrived moments later, his earlier humiliation replaced by anticipation as he joined his brothers in surrounding the veteran who had dared to challenge him. Snake stepped forward as the spokesman for the group, his voice carrying the authority of a man who was used to being obeyed without question. "You picked the wrong man to mess with today, old-timer. Time to learn what happens when you disrespect the Desert Reapers." Marcus said nothing, his silence more unnerving than any verbal response could have been. His eyes moved constantly, tracking the positions and movements of all 6 bikers, while his mind calculated distances, angles, and potential weapons within reach. The tactical situation was challenging, but not impossible. He had faced worse odds in Afghanistan and lived to tell about it. The confrontation was about to begin in earnest, and the empty desert would soon witness a clash between professional military training and street violence that would forever change the lives of everyone involved. The standoff in the desert rest area stretched into a tense minute of silence, as both sides assessed each other across the sun-baked concrete. The Desert Reapers had formed a loose semicircle around Marcus, their leather jackets and chrome accessories gleaming in the harsh Nevada sunlight. Each man carried himself with the swagger of someone accustomed to intimidating civilians, but there was something about their target that didn't fit the usual pattern of frightened submission they were used to encountering. Marcus stood perfectly, still in the center of the formation, his weathered hands hanging loosely at his sides. To an untrained observer, he might have appeared relaxed, even resigned to his fate. But his posture was actually a combat stance, weight evenly distributed, muscles coiled and ready to explode into action at the first sign of aggression. His eyes never stopped moving, tracking each biker's position and noting the weapons they carried both openly and concealed. Snake took another step forward, close enough now that Marcus could see the network of scars that covered the club president's knuckles and the cold calculation in his pale blue eyes. "You seem like a smart man," Snake said, his voice carrying the false reasonableness of a predator offering mercy to its prey. "Smart enough to know when you're outnumbered and outgunned." For the first time since the confrontation began, Marcus spoke. His voice was calm, measured, carrying the quiet authority of someone who had commanded men in life-and-death situations. "I count 6 of you. In my experience, that's usually about right." The comment sent a ripple of uncertainty through the Desert Reapers. Most civilians faced with overwhelming odds would either beg for mercy or attempt futile bravado. Marcus's response suggested neither fear nor false courage, but rather the kind of professional assessment that came from extensive combat experience. Kyle stepped forward from his position behind Snake, his earlier humiliation driving him to reassert his dominance. "You think you're some kind of tough guy, old man? Let me tell you what's going to happen. We're going to beat you unconscious, take everything you own, and leave you for the vultures. And there ain't nobody coming to help you out here." Marcus turned his attention to Kyle, and for a brief moment, the biker caught a glimpse of something in the veteran's eyes that made his blood run cold. It wasn't anger or fear or any emotion that Kyle recognized. It was the look of a professional soldier evaluating a target, calculating the most efficient way to neutralize a threat. "You had your chance to walk away back at the gas station," Marcus said quietly. "Now you've involved your friends in something they don't understand." Diesel laughed, a booming sound that echoed off the concrete walls of the nearby restroom building. "Listen to this guy. He thinks he's going to take on all 6 of us." The massive biker flexed his arms, his biceps straining against the leather of his jacket. "I've killed men twice your size with my bare hands, Grandpa." Marcus's response was unexpected. Instead of backing down or attempting to negotiate, he began removing his wallet from his back pocket. The movement was slow and deliberate, clearly designed to avoid triggering a violent response from the increasingly agitated bikers. "I've got about $300 cash," Marcus said, holding up the wallet. "Take it and ride away. This doesn't have to end badly for anyone." Jimmy laughed and shook his head. "Now he wants to negotiate. Too late for that, old-timer. You embarrassed one of our brothers, and that means you embarrassed all of us. Money ain't gonna fix this." Snake held up a hand to silence his men, his tactical mind working through the implications of Marcus's behavior. In his experience, most people in desperate situations either panicked or tried to fight their way out immediately. The veteran's calm offer of money suggested either genuine naivety about the seriousness of his situation or a level of confidence that was deeply troubling. "Keep your money," Snake said finally. "We'll take it after we're done with you anyway. But first, you're going to get on your knees and apologize to my brother for what you did on the highway." Marcus dropped his wallet back into his pocket and straightened to his full height. "I'm not getting on my knees for anyone, and I'm not apologizing for defending myself against a man who pulled a gun on me." The mention of Kyle's weapon use brought surprised looks from several of the other bikers. Kyle had conveniently omitted that detail when he called for backup, presenting himself as the victim of unprovoked aggression rather than admitting that he had escalated the confrontation to the level of deadly force. Rico stepped forward, his loyalty to Kyle overriding any concerns about the tactical situation. "You calling Crusher a liar?" "I'm saying your friend pulled a pistol on an unarmed man and still couldn't get the job done," Marcus replied evenly. "Now he's brought back up because he can't handle his own problems." The insult hit its mark, and Kyle's face flushed red with renewed anger. He reached into his jacket and withdrew the same chrome-plated pistol he had brandished during the highway chase, this time holding it steady and pointed directly at Marcus's chest. "How about I finish what I started?" Kyle snarled. "See how tough you are with a bullet in your gut." The appearance of the weapon changed the dynamics of the confrontation entirely. What had been a tense standoff with the potential for negotiation suddenly became a life-or-death situation where any wrong move could result in immediate violence. Marcus evaluated the new threat with the dispassionate analysis of a professional warrior. Kyle was holding the pistol in a standard grip, approximately 15 feet away, close enough for reasonable accuracy, but far enough to give Marcus options if he moved quickly enough. More importantly, Kyle was holding the weapon like someone who had learned to shoot from movies rather than professional training, his stance unstable and his trigger discipline poor. "Put the gun away, Kyle," Snake ordered sharply. "We do this clean. No gunplay unless we have to. But Kyle was beyond listening to orders from anyone, even his club president. The humiliation he had suffered on the highway had been eating at him for the past hour, and he was determined to restore his reputation through violence. "I'm going to count to 3, old man. Get on your knees and beg, or I start shooting." 1. Marcus shifted his weight slightly, a movement so subtle that none of the bikers noticed it. His military training had included extensive instruction in disarming armed opponents, and he was calculating distances and angles with the speed of someone who had practiced the techniques thousands of times. 2. The other Desert Reapers watched, in fascination and growing unease as the confrontation escalated beyond their comfort level. Most of their intimidation tactics relied on the threat of violence rather than actual gunfire, which tended to attract unwanted attention from law enforcement and federal agencies. Kyle never got to 3. Marcus moved with explosive speed that caught everyone completely off guard. Instead of backing away from the gun or attempting to negotiate further, he launched himself directly at Kyle with the kind of controlled aggression that could only come from extensive combat training. The veteran covered the 15 feet between himself and the armed biker in less than 2 seconds, his approach angled to avoid the pistol's line of fire, while positioning himself for maximum leverage. Kyle tried to track his movement with the gun, but Marcus was already inside his effective range and closing fast. The disarming technique was textbook perfect. Marcus's left hand swept up to redirect the pistol away from his body, while his right hand grabbed Kyle's wrist and applied a joint lock that sent waves of pain shooting up the biker's arm. The combination of sudden pain and mechanical disadvantage forced Kyle's fingers to open, and the chrome-plated pistol clattered harmlessly across the concrete. But Marcus wasn't finished. As Kyle stumbled backward, off balance and confused by the speed of the attack, the veteran followed up with a precise elbow strike to the biker's solar plexus. The blow doubled Kyle over, gasping for breath and temporarily incapacitated. The entire sequence had taken less than 5 seconds from start to finish, transforming Kyle from an armed threat into a groaning figure curled up on the ground. The other Desert Reapers stared in shock, trying to process what they had just witnessed. Snake was the first to recover from his surprise. "Take him down!" he shouted, reaching for the knife that hung from his belt. "All of you now!" But Marcus had used Kyle's defeat to position himself tactically, putting the disabled biker between himself and the rest of the group while keeping the scattered picnic tables within reach as potential weapons or cover. He grabbed Kyle by the back of his leather jacket and hauled him upright, using the semi-conscious man as a human shield. "Your friend is going to need medical attention," Marcus announced calmly, his arm wrapped around Kyle's throat in a blood choke that could render him unconscious or dead, depending on how much pressure was applied. "Suggest you get him to a hospital instead of making this worse." Diesel took a step forward, his massive fists clenched and ready for battle. "Let him go, you son of a bitch!" Marcus tightened his grip slightly, and Kyle made a strangled sound that stopped Diesel in his tracks. "I said back off, all of you. I've got nothing against any of you personally, but I will put your friend to sleep permanently if you force me to." The threat was delivered with such calm certainty that none of the bikers doubted Marcus's willingness to carry it out. They found themselves facing a tactical situation they had never encountered before, a civilian who fought like a professional soldier and who had turned their superior numbers against them by taking a hostage. Snake's mind was racing, trying to find a way to regain control of the situation. The mission had been simple: intimidate a civilian and restore Kyle's reputation within the club. Instead, they were now facing an opponent who had demonstrated skills that none of them possessed, and who held one of their brothers at his mercy. "What do you want?" Snake asked finally, his voice tight with frustration. "I want you to load your friend onto one of your bikes and ride away." Marcus replied. "This ends here, and nobody else gets hurt." Jimmy stepped sideways, trying to get a better angle for a potential attack, but Marcus tracked his movement and adjusted his position accordingly. "Stay where you are," the veteran warned. "I can see all of you, and I'm faster than you think." The standoff stretched into another tense minute as the Desert Reapers tried to figure out how to salvage their pride without getting their brother killed. Kyle was barely conscious, his weight supported entirely by Marcus's arm, and his breathing was becoming increasingly labored. Ghost, who had remained silent throughout the confrontation, finally spoke up. "He's turning blue, Snake. We need to make a decision." Snake looked around at his men, seeing doubt and uncertainty in faces that were usually confident and aggressive. The veteran had managed to turn what should have been an easy intimidation into a tactical nightmare, and continuing the fight would almost certainly result in Kyle's death. "All right," Snake said finally. "You win this round, but this isn't over." Marcus began backing toward his truck, still maintaining his grip on Kyle, but loosening it enough to allow the biker to breathe more easily. "It is over," he corrected. "Unless you want to explain to the police why one of your members pulled a gun on an unarmed man. I'm guessing your club has better things to do than deal with federal weapons charges." The mention of law enforcement sent another ripple of unease through the group. The Desert Reapers' various enterprises depended on maintaining a low profile, and a federal investigation would be disastrous for their operations. Snake nodded reluctantly to Diesel, who moved forward carefully to take Kyle from Marcus's grasp. The massive biker lifted his unconscious friend with surprising gentleness, carrying him toward the motorcycles while the others maintained their defensive positions. "This ain't over," Diesel growled as he passed Marcus. "We know where to find you." Marcus watched as the bikers loaded Kyle onto the back of Rico's motorcycle and prepared to leave. The confrontation had lasted less than 10 minutes, but it had fundamentally changed the relationship between the veteran and the Desert Reapers. What had begun as a simple case of road rage had escalated into something much more serious. As the 5 motorcycles roared out of the rest area and back onto the highway, Marcus retrieved Kyle's drop pistol from the concrete and examined it carefully. The weapon was loaded with a round in the chamber and the safety off, evidence that Kyle had been prepared to use deadly force over a trivial traffic dispute. Marcus unloaded the pistol and tucked it into his truck's glove compartment. Along with the ammunition, he would turn it over to the police when he reached Los Angeles, but for now it represented potential evidence of the biker's criminal intent. The desert rest area was quiet again, with only the sound of wind through the Joshua trees and the distant hum of traffic on the highway. Marcus climbed back into his truck and continued his journey, but he knew that his confrontation with the Desert Reapers was far from over. Men like Snake didn't forget humiliation, and they didn't forgive challenges to their authority. As he drove toward California, Marcus began planning for what would almost certainly be another encounter with the motorcycle club. They would be more prepared next time, more cautious, and they would bring enough firepower to ensure that they wouldn't be outmaneuvered again. But Marcus Wheeler had spent 23 years preparing for exactly these kinds of situations, and he was ready for whatever the Desert Reapers could throw at him. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, leading toward Los Angeles and the job interview that represented his chance for a new beginning. Behind him, in his rearview mirror, he could see dust clouds on the horizon where the motorcycles had disappeared. The game was far from over, and both sides were already planning their next moves in what had become a deadly contest of wills in the Nevada desert. The emergency room at Valley General Hospital buzzed with the controlled chaos that marked a typical Saturday afternoon in Las Vegas. Nurses moved efficiently between patients while doctors consulted charts and made rapid decisions about treatment priorities. The air smelled of disinfectant and anxiety, punctuated by the occasional wail of incoming ambulances, delivering new casualties from the city's endless stream of accidents and violence. Kyle Bradshaw lay on a gurney in curtained Bay 7, his leather jacket cut away by medical staff who needed access to check for internal injuries. His breathing had stabilized during the motorcycle ride to the hospital, but angry purple bruises were already forming around his throat where Marcus's arm had compressed his windpipe. The attending physician, Dr. Sarah Chen, completed her examination with professional efficiency while noting the extensive scarring on Kyle's knuckles and forearms, compression injury to the trachea, possible bruising of the laryngeal cartilage. Dr. Chen dictated to the nurse recording Kyle's chart. No obvious signs of internal bleeding, but will need X-rays to rule out cervical spine damage. Patient appears to have been in some kind of chokehold. Snake paced in the waiting room like a caged predator, his boots clicking against the polished linoleum floor with metronomic precision. The other Desert Reapers sat in uncomfortable plastic chairs, their leather-clad presence drawing nervous glances from the hospital's civilian patients. Rico kept checking his phone for updates from contacts within the club, while Jimmy and Diesel engaged in hushed conversations about revenge and retribution. Ghost remained apart from the others, standing near a window that looked out over the hospital parking lot. His pale eyes scanned the arriving vehicles, noting license plates and occupants with the systematic attention of someone trained in surveillance. He had spent 15 years in various prisons, and the experience had taught him the value of always knowing who was around him and what they might be planning. After 2 hours of waiting, Dr. Chen emerged from the treatment area and approached Snake with the controlled expression of someone who dealt with violent injuries on a regular basis. "Your friend is going to recover fully," she announced without preamble. "The damage to his throat is superficial, though he'll have trouble speaking for a few days. More concerning is the evidence of significant trauma to his solar plexus. Someone with considerable training did this to him." Snake absorbed the medical assessment without visible reaction, though his jaw tightened slightly at the confirmation that their opponent possessed professional combat skills. "When can he leave?" "A few more hours for observation," Dr. Chen replied. "But I'm required to ask about the circumstances of his injuries. This wasn't an accident." The club president's pale eyes fixed on the doctor with predatory intensity. "He fell off his motorcycle. Accidents happen on the highway." Dr. Chen had worked in emergency medicine long enough to recognize the signs of criminal violence, and she wasn't fooled by Snake's explanation. But she also understood that pressing the issue with members of an outlaw motorcycle club could create more problems than it solved. "I'll need to file a report with the hospital administration, standard procedure for injuries of this nature." "You do what you need to do, Doc," Snake said dismissively. "Just fix him up so we can get out of here." After Dr. Chen departed, Snake gathered his men in a corner of the waiting room where their conversation wouldn't be overheard by other patients or hospital staff. His voice was low and controlled, but the underlying fury was unmistakable. "Whoever that old man is, he's not just some random civilian," Snake began. "The way he moved, the techniques he used, that was military training, probably special forces or something similar. We underestimated him, and it cost us." Rico shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "So what do we do about it? Can't let him get away with what he did to Kyle. Word gets out that some senior citizen made fools of the Desert Reapers, and our reputation is finished." "We're going to find him," Snake said simply. "And when we do, we're going to finish this properly. But next time, we do it smart. No more rushing in like amateurs." Diesel cracked his knuckles, the sound echoing in the quiet waiting room. "I say we track him down tonight and burn his house down with him inside it. Send a message that nobody messes with us. And bring the FBI down on our heads." Snake shook his head dismissively. Use your brain, Diesel. We handle this clean and quiet, no evidence, no witnesses. Make it look like an accident or random crime. Jimmy leaned forward, his mechanical expertise making him the club's go-to planner for complex operations. We need to figure out who he is first, get his license plate number, run it through our contacts at the DMV, find out where he lives, where he works, who his family is. Information is power. Ghost finally spoke from his position by the window, his voice barely above a whisper. Already got his plate number. Nevada registration looked like a rental truck from the paperwork on his dashboard. He's not local. The revelation that their target was driving a rental vehicle complicated the situation considerably. It suggested that Marcus was passing through the area rather than being a permanent resident, which would make tracking him significantly more difficult. Rental truck means he's traveling, Snake mused. Question is whether he's heading home or just getting started on a trip. Either way, we need to move fast before he gets too far away. Meanwhile, 300 miles southwest of Las Vegas, Marcus Wheeler was checking into a modest motel on the outskirts of Los Angeles. The Sunset Inn was the kind of establishment that catered to travelers on tight budgets, offering clean rooms and basic amenities without any pretense of luxury. The desk clerk, a tired-looking woman in her 60s, barely glanced up from her paperwork as she processed his registration. Room 127, around back by the pool, she said, handing him a physical key rather than the electronic cards used by more upscale establishments. Checkouts at 11, and there's a diner next door if you need breakfast. Marcus's room was spartanly furnished but clean, with a view of the parking lot through thin curtains that filtered the late afternoon sunlight. He set his single duffel bag on the dresser and immediately began his evening routine, checking the locks on the door and windows, noting potential exit routes, and positioning the room's furniture to provide both concealment and defensive positions. If needed, the habits had been ingrained during his first deployment to Afghanistan, where relaxing your guard could mean the difference between going home and going home in a box. Even in civilian life, Marcus found comfort in the systematic approach to personal security that had kept him alive through multiple combat tours. His job interview was scheduled for 9 o'clock the following morning at the Veterans Transition Center, located in a converted warehouse in the Arts District of downtown Los Angeles. Marcus had researched the organization extensively, learning about their programs for helping former military personnel adjust to civilian life through counseling, job placement, and emergency assistance. The position he was interviewing for involved working directly with veterans who were struggling with post-traumatic stress, addiction, homelessness, and the myriad other challenges that could derail the transition to civilian life. It was exactly the kind of meaningful work that Marcus had been searching for since leaving the army, an opportunity to use his experience and training to help others who had walked the same difficult path. He spent the evening reviewing his prepared responses to likely interview questions and studying the resumes of the center's current staff. The executive director, Colonel Patricia Hayes, was a retired Air Force officer with extensive experience in military social services. The clinical staff included licensed therapists, social workers, and peer counselors, many of whom were veterans themselves. As night fell over Los Angeles, Marcus allowed himself to feel cautiously optimistic about the interview and the possibility of a fresh start. The confrontation with the Desert Reapers had been an unwelcome distraction, but it seemed unlikely that a motorcycle club based in Nevada would pursue him across state lines over a relatively minor incident. He was wrong. Back in Las Vegas, Snake had used his extensive network of criminal contacts to obtain Marcus's identity and destination. The Desert Reapers maintained relationships with various outlaw clubs throughout the southwestern United States, and favors could be called in when necessary. A phone call to the Hells Angels chapter in San Bernardino had produced the rental truck's tracking information, along with confirmation that the vehicle was currently parked at a motel in Los Angeles. Marcus Wheeler, age 52, retired Army, Snake read from the information that had been faxed to the hospital. 23 years of service, multiple deployments to Afghanistan and Iraq. Last assignment was with Special Operations Command at Fort Bragg, currently unemployed, living in Reno. The military service record explained everything. Marcus's combat skills, his tactical awareness, his ability to remain calm under pressure. But it also provided the Desert Reapers with valuable intelligence about their target's capabilities and likely responses to different scenarios. Special operations. Rico whistled softly. No wonder he took Kyle apart like that. Those guys are trained killers. Was a trained killer, Snake corrected. Now he's just another civilian, and civilians can be dealt with. We know where he is and we know he's alone. Time to finish what Kyle started. Ghost moved away from the window and joined the group. Los Angeles is Iron Wolves territory. We'll need permission to operate there or risk starting a war with another. In club, already handled, Snake replied. Talked to their president an hour ago. They'll stay out of our business as long as we keep it clean and quiet. No public shootouts, no collateral damage to civilians. Kyle emerged from the treatment area, just as the group was finalizing their plans for pursuing Marcus to California. His throat was wrapped in bandages, and his voice was reduced to a hoarse whisper, but his eyes burned with the desire for revenge. "I'm coming with you," he croaked, struggling to make himself heard. "You're in no condition to ride," Snake replied, firmly. "Stay here and heal up. We'll handle this." But Kyle was beyond listening to reason. The humiliation he had suffered at the rest area had consumed his thoughts during the hours of medical treatment, and he was determined to be present when Marcus paid the price for his defiance. "I'm coming," he repeated, his damaged voice carrying absolute conviction. "That bastard is mine." Snake studied his injured brother for a long moment, then nodded reluctantly. Kyle's condition would make him a liability in any physical confrontation, but his knowledge of Marcus's fighting style and tactics could prove valuable. Besides, denying him the opportunity for personal revenge might create problems within the club hierarchy. "You ride with Rico," Snake decided, "and you follow orders without question. This isn't about your ego anymore. It's about the club's reputation." Within an hour, 4 motorcycles were roaring south on Interstate 15 toward Los Angeles, their riders bent on delivering a lesson that would restore their honor and eliminate the only witness to their humiliation. The desert highway stretched endlessly ahead, marked by the lights of distant cities and the promise of violence to come. Marcus had no idea that death was riding toward him across the Nevada wasteland, or that his peaceful evening of interview preparation was about to be shattered by men who had never learned to accept defeat. The night was still young, and the most dangerous phase of his confrontation with the Desert Reapers was about to begin. In Los Angeles, the city hummed with its usual energy as millions of people went about their evening routines, unaware that their urban landscape was about to become a battlefield between a retired soldier and a motorcycle club that had never met an enemy they couldn't intimidate or eliminate. The stage was set for a final confrontation that would test everything Marcus had learned about survival tactics and the price of standing up to evil men. The Desert Reapers were coming, and this time they intended to finish what they had started in the Nevada desert. The Veterans Transition Center occupied a renovated warehouse in downtown Los Angeles, its industrial brick facade softened by landscaped gardens and a welcoming entrance that spoke to the organization's mission of helping former military personnel rebuild their lives. Marcus arrived 45 minutes early for his 9 o'clock interview, a habit ingrained by decades of military punctuality. He sat in his rental truck in the parking lot, reviewing his notes one final time while observing the steady stream of veterans entering and leaving the building. The center served as a beacon of hope for thousands of former service members who struggled with the transition to civilian life. Through its doors passed men and women who had served their country with honor, but found themselves adrift in a world that often seemed indifferent to their sacrifices. Some came seeking employment assistance, others needed help with housing or medical care, and many simply required someone who understood the unique challenges of military service. Colonel Patricia Hayes greeted Marcus in the reception area with the firm handshake and direct eye contact that marked her as a fellow veteran. At 58, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had commanded respect in both military and civilian environments. Her grey hair was cut in a practical style, and her business suit couldn't entirely disguise the bearing of an officer who had spent 30 years leading airmen through complex operations. "Thank you for making the trip from Nevada, Mr. Wheeler," Colonel Hayes said as she led him toward her office. "Your application materials were impressive, but I always prefer to meet candidates in person before making final decisions." Marcus's interview began with the standard questions about his military background and civilian work experience. He spoke confidently about his 23 years of service, describing his progression from enlisted soldier to non-commissioned officer, his multiple deployments to combat zones, and his final assignment with Special Operations Command. Colonel Hayes listened with the understanding of someone who had navigated similar challenges in her own military career. "What draws you to veteran transition work?" she asked, leaning back in her chair and studying Marcus with shrewd eyes. "I've been where these men and women are," Marcus replied honestly. "The military gives you structure, purpose, a clear mission. When that's gone, it's easy to feel lost. I think I can help them find their way because I've had to find my own way." The conversation continued for nearly an hour, covering everything from therapeutic techniques to crisis intervention protocols. Marcus found himself genuinely engaged with the work that the center was doing, and Colonel Hayes seemed increasingly impressed with his thoughtful responses and practical insights. "We have a position available immediately," she said finally. "The pay isn't spectacular, but the work is meaningful. When could you start?" Marcus felt a surge of satisfaction at the job offer, the first positive development in what had been a challenging few months of unemployment. "I could relocate within 2 weeks," he said. "I don't have many ties keeping me in Nevada." As they shook hands to conclude the interview, Colonel Hayes mentioned that the center was hosting a community barbecue that afternoon for veterans and their families. "You're welcome to attend if you have time," she offered. "It might give you a better sense of the population we serve." Marcus accepted the invitation, viewing it as an opportunity to learn more about his potential new workplace and colleagues. He spent the morning exploring Los Angeles, familiarizing himself with the city that might soon become his home. The urban landscape was vastly different from the small Nevada towns where he had lived since leaving the army, but he found the energy and diversity appealing. What Marcus didn't know was that 4 Desert Reapers had arrived in Los Angeles just after dawn, their motorcycles parked in an abandoned lot 6 blocks from his motel. Snake had spent the early morning hours conducting reconnaissance of the target area, noting traffic patterns, police patrol routes, and potential escape routes. His military-style planning reflected years of criminal operations that had kept him out of prison, despite numerous close calls with law enforcement. The Iron Wolves Motorcycle Club had provided the Desert Reapers with detailed intelligence about the Sunset Inn and its surrounding neighborhood. The motel sat in an industrial area with minimal police presence and plenty of abandoned buildings that could provide concealment for their operation. More importantly, the area's high crime rate meant that violence would likely be attributed to gang activity rather than an organized hit by out-of-state bikers. Rico had been assigned to watch the motel's parking lot from a position across the street, using binoculars to monitor Marcus's movements while staying in radio contact with the rest of the team. He reported that their target had left early that morning in his rental truck, presumably for the job interview that their intelligence had revealed. "Target mobile, heading downtown," Rico's voice crackled through Snake's earpiece. "Should we follow?" "Negative," Snake replied from his position in an alley behind the motel. "Too much traffic, too many witnesses. We stick to the plan and hit him when he comes back." Jimmy and Ghost had used bolt cutters to gain entry to the motel's maintenance area, where they were installing surveillance equipment that would alert them to Marcus's return. Their years of criminal experience had taught them the value of preparation and patience when conducting high-stakes operations. Kyle sat on his motorcycle in the abandoned lot, his damaged throat wrapped in bandages, and his eyes burning with the desire for revenge. The pain medication he had been prescribed at the hospital had been supplemented with methamphetamine, obtained from Iron Wolf's contacts, creating a volatile combination of pharmaceutical drugs and street stimulants that had him vibrating with barely controlled energy. Snake's plan was methodical and professional. They would wait for Marcus to return to his motel room, then breach the door using techniques learned from their various prison terms. The target would be overwhelmed quickly and quietly, then transported to a secondary location where Kyle could take his time, extracting revenge for the humiliation he had suffered. "Remember, we need him alive initially," Snake emphasized during their final briefing. "Kyle gets his payback, then we dispose of the body where it won't be found. Clean and professional, no loose ends." At the Veterans Transition Center, Marcus found himself genuinely enjoying the community barbecue. The event drew dozens of veterans from all branches of service, representing conflicts from Vietnam through the recent wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. He listened to their stories, shared some of his own experiences, and began to understand the scope of the challenges that his new job would entail. Dr. Amanda Foster, the center's clinical psychologist, introduced Marcus to several veterans who were struggling with various aspects of civilian transition. There was Robert, a Marine who had lost his left leg to an IED in Fallujah and was battling both phantom pain and depression. Sarah, an Army medic who suffered from severe PTSD after treating casualties during the siege of Baghdad. David, a Navy SEAL who had completed 8 combat deployments but couldn't hold a civilian job for more than a few months. Each conversation reinforced Marcus's conviction that this work represented his best opportunity to make a meaningful contribution to society. These men and women had sacrificed for their country and deserved every possible assistance in rebuilding their lives. The job would be challenging, but it would also provide the sense of purpose that he had been missing since leaving the military. As the afternoon progressed, Marcus found himself in deep conversation with Dr. Foster about the psychological challenges facing combat veterans. She was impressed by his intuitive understanding of trauma responses and his practical insights into the military mindset. "You have a natural gift for this work," she told him as they watched a group of veterans playing volleyball with their children. "Colonel Hayes was right to hire you. I think you're going to make a real difference here." Marcus felt a warmth of professional satisfaction that he hadn't experienced in months. For the first time since leaving the Army, he could envision a future that involved more than just surviving from day to day. The Veterans Transition Center offered him the opportunity to build something meaningful, to help others, while also healing some of his own wounds from military service. But even as he enjoyed the barbecue and contemplated his new beginning, Marcus's tactical instincts remained active. He noticed the unmarked van that had been parked across the street for several hours. The way certain individuals seemed to be watching the center's entrance, the subtle signs that suggested surveillance. His paranoia might have been justified by his recent encounters with the Desert Reapers, but it could also have been the result of hypervigilance developed during multiple combat deployments. In war zones, survival depended on noticing details that others missed, on detecting threats before they became lethal. Those skills didn't simply disappear when a soldier returned to civilian life. Dr. Foster noticed his distraction during their conversation. "Is everything all right? You seem like you're scanning for threats." Marcus forced himself to refocus on their discussion. Old habits from downrange. Sometimes it's hard to turn off the security mindset. "That's actually something we work on here," Dr. Foster replied. "The transition from constant threat assessment to civilian normalcy. It's one of the most common challenges our clients face." As evening approached, Marcus reluctantly prepared to leave the barbecue and return to his motel. He had thoroughly enjoyed his introduction to the Veterans Transition Center, and he was already looking forward to starting his new job. The drive back to the Sunset Inn took him through industrial neighborhoods that grew progressively less welcoming as he moved away from the downtown area. What Marcus didn't realize was that his every movement was being tracked by the Desert Reapers' surveillance network. Rico had followed him to the Veterans Transition Center and had been monitoring the facility throughout the afternoon, waiting for their target to emerge so that the final phase of their operation could begin. "Target leaving the center," Rico reported as Marcus walked to his rental truck. "Should be back at the motel in 20 minutes. Snake acknowledged the transmission and signaled his team to move into position. Jimmy and Ghost emerged from their hiding places and took up positions covering the motel's front and rear entrances. Kyle fired up his motorcycle and began riding toward the Sunset Inn, his damaged voice box making it impossible for him to communicate verbally, but his intent clearly murderous. The stage was set for a final confrontation that would test everything. Marcus had learned about survival, tactics, and the price of standing up to violent criminals. The Desert Reapers had spent the entire day preparing for this moment, using every advantage that planning and superior numbers could provide. But Marcus Wheeler was not the same man who had stopped for gas in Nevada that morning. The job interview and community barbecue had reminded him of what he was fighting for. Not just his own survival, but his chance to build a meaningful life, helping other veterans overcome their own struggles. The stakes had changed, and so had his determination to survive whatever the Desert Reapers might throw at him. The sun was setting over Los Angeles as Marcus drove through the motel's parking lot, unaware that 4 armed criminals were waiting in the shadows to deliver their version of justice. The next few hours would determine whether his military training and combat experience would be enough to overcome the kind of coordinated attack that had ended the lives of better men in darker places. The endgame was about to begin, and both sides were prepared to fight to the finish. Marcus parked his rental truck in the Sunset Inn's lot as darkness settled over the industrial district of Los Angeles. The orange sodium lights created pools of harsh illumination separated by deep shadows, transforming the familiar motel into something that felt subtly menacing. His tactical instincts, sharpened by years of combat experience, detected something wrong in the atmosphere, a tension in the air that suggested predators were nearby. He sat in the cab of his truck for several minutes, systematically scanning the parking lot and surrounding buildings for signs of surveillance or ambush. Nothing appeared obviously out of place, but his gut told him that the situation had changed since morning. The unmarked van he had noticed near the Veterans Transition Center was now parked at a diner across the street, its occupants invisible, behind tinted windows. Moving with deliberate casualness, Marcus retrieved his duffel bag from the truck's bed and walked toward his room. To any observer, he appeared to be a tired traveler returning from a long day. but his senses were hyper-alert and his muscles were coiled for immediate action. Years of surviving in hostile territory had taught him to trust his instincts, even when logic suggested no immediate threat. Face invisible in the shadows as he tracked the veteran's movement through night vision binoculars. The former convict had spent countless hours practicing surveillance techniques during his various prison sentences, learning from older inmates who had survived decades in both criminal enterprises and correctional facilities. "Target at the door," Ghost whispered into his radio headset. "Moving to entry. All units stand by." Snake's voice crackled back through the earpiece. "Copy that. Maintain position until he's inside, then we move. Jimmy, status on the door?" From his position near the motel's rear emergency exit, Jimmy confirmed that he had successfully disabled the lock mechanism using techniques learned during his younger years as a professional burglar. "Back door is compromised. Fire exit alarm is bypassed. We have multiple egress routes when needed." Kyle sat astride his motorcycle in the alley behind the building, his hands shaking from the combination of pain medication and methamphetamine coursing through his system. The bandages around his throat were stained with blood from his earlier exertions, and his eyes held the glassy intensity of someone operating beyond the limits of rational thought. Rico monitored police radio frequencies from his position in the abandoned lot, using a scanner to ensure that their operation wouldn't be interrupted by unexpected law enforcement activity. The Desert Reapers had learned through bitter experience that successful criminal operations required constant awareness of official responses. Marcus inserted his key into the lock of room 127, but something about the mechanism felt wrong. The lock turned too easily, without the slight resistance that he remembered from the previous night. His hand froze on the doorknob as his mind processed the implications. Someone had been inside his room, possibly tampering with the lock or installing surveillance equipment. Instead of entering immediately, Marcus stepped back and examined the doorframe more carefully. Under the harsh glare of the parking lot lights, he could see fresh scratches around the lock cylinder and minute metal filings on the concrete walkway. Someone with professional lock-picking skills had gained unauthorized entry to his room. The discovery triggered a cascade of tactical calculations as Marcus evaluated his options. He could retreat to his truck and drive away, abandoning his belongings, but preserving his safety. He could call the police and report a break-in, though that would involve lengthy explanations about his confrontation with the Desert Reapers. Or he could enter the room knowing it might be a trap, using his military training to turn the situation to his advantage. Marcus chose the third option, moving with the fluid grace of someone who had conducted countless building entries in hostile territory. Marcus drew Kyle's confiscated pistol from his jacket and checked the chamber. The weapon was loaded and ready, though he hoped he wouldn't need to use it. His preference was always to resolve conflicts through superior tactics rather than firepower. He positioned himself to one side of the door and slowly turned the handle, using the portal itself as cover while he evaluated the room's interior. The space appeared empty, but Marcus's experience had taught him that appearances could be fatally deceptive. He waited 30 seconds, listening for any sound that might indicate the presence of intruders. Snake watched through high-powered binoculars from his position on the roof of an adjacent warehouse, his vantage point providing clear observation of both the motel room and the surrounding area. The veteran's cautious approach to entering his room confirmed that their target possessed the kind of tactical awareness that would make a direct assault extremely dangerous. "Targets made us," Snake transmitted to his team. "He knows something's wrong. Switch to contingency plan Bravo." The contingency plan involved abandoning the ambush inside the motel room in favor of a coordinated assault from multiple directions. It was riskier because it increased the chances of witnesses and police involvement, but it also reduced the likelihood that Marcus could use the room's interior for defensive purposes. Jimmy emerged from his concealment near the rear exit and began moving toward the front of the building, his steps silent on the concrete walkway. Ghost maintained his position behind the dumpster, but shifted his weight to prepare for rapid movement. Rico continued monitoring police communications while Kyle revved his motorcycle engine, the sound echoing off the surrounding buildings like mechanical thunder. Marcus finally entered his room, moving in a tactical crouch with his weapon raised and ready. The space was exactly as he had left it that morning, with no obvious signs of intrusion beyond the tampering with the lock. But his trained senses detected subtle indicators that someone had been inside. The slight displacement of items on the dresser, the different angle of the bathroom door, the faint scent of cigarette smoke in the air. He conducted a systematic search of the room, checking for electronic surveillance devices, explosive booby traps, or hidden intruders. Under the bed, he discovered a small wireless transmitter that had been broadcasting his conversations to receivers outside the building. The device was sophisticated, suggesting that his opponents had access to professional surveillance equipment. The discovery of the transmitter confirmed Marcus's worst fears about the Desert Reaper's capabilities and intentions. They weren't simply street thugs looking for a quick score. They were organized criminals with the resources and skills to conduct complex operations. The situation had escalated far beyond a simple confrontation over road rage. Marcus disabled the transmitter and placed it in his pocket as evidence, then moved to the room's single window to assess his tactical situation. The view revealed at least 2 potential ambush positions, and he caught a glimpse of movement near the dumpster that suggested someone was maintaining surveillance on his location. His military training kicked into high gear as he developed a plan for dealing with multiple hostile contacts in an urban environment. The motel room was a potential death trap, but it also provided certain defensive advantages if used correctly. The walls would stop small arms fire, the furniture could be used for cover and concealment, and the bathroom offered a fallback position. With limited approaches, Snake's patience finally ran out as he watched Marcus moving efficiently through his preparations for a defensive stand. The veteran's professional approach to the situation made it clear that a successful assault would require overwhelming force applied quickly and decisively. "All units, execute assault," Snake commanded. "Take him alive if possible, but don't take unnecessary risks. If he fights, put him down." The coordinated attack began with Jimmy breaching the room's rear window using a crowbar, while Ghost approached the front door with bolt cutters to defeat the security chain. Kyle roared into the parking lot on his motorcycle, his damaged voice producing an inhuman shriek as he prepared to storm the building. Marcus heard the window breaking behind him and spun toward the sound, his weapon tracking the new threat as Jimmy's bulk filled the window frame. The former burglar was halfway through the opening when Marcus's first shot caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending him crashing back into the darkness outside. "Contact rear!" Marcus shouted automatically, his military training taking over as he moved toward better cover behind the room's heavy dresser. The verbal report was unnecessary since he was alone, but years of combat operations had made the practice instinctive. Ghost reached the front door just as Marcus fired. His second shot and the sound of gunfire convinced the pale enforcer to abandon his plan for a subtle entry. Instead, he kicked the door with explosive force, splintering the frame and sending the security chain flying across the room. Marcus was ready for the frontal assault, having positioned himself to cover both the window and door simultaneously. His third shot caught Ghost center mass, but the enforcer was wearing body armor under his leather jacket. The bullet's impact staggered him, but didn't drop him, and he managed to return fire with a sawed-off shotgun that filled the room with deadly pellets. The shotgun blast shredded the dresser's wooden facade and sent splinters flying in all directions. But Marcus had already rolled toward the bathroom door to avoid the devastating spread of buckshot. His fourth shot was more carefully aimed, targeting Ghost's unprotected head and ending the enforcer's participation in the assault. Kyle burst through the damaged front door just as Ghost's body hit the floor, his damaged throat producing horrible, gasping sounds as he struggled to vocalize his rage. The methamphetamine in his system had pushed him beyond rational thought, transforming him into something more animal than human as he searched for his target. Marcus emerged from the bathroom, with his weapon trained on Kyle's center mass, but he hesitated to fire because the biker appeared to be unarmed. That moment of restraint nearly cost him his life as Kyle produced a knife from his boot and launched himself across the room in a drug-fueled attack. The veteran's combat reflexes saved him as he sidestepped Kyle's charge and delivered a devastating elbow strike to the back of the biker's neck. Kyle crashed into the bathroom wall and collapsed, his knife skittering across the tile floor as consciousness fled his damaged brain. Outside, Snake and Rico were regrouping after the failure of their coordinated assault. Jimmy was wounded and Ghost was dead, while Kyle was either unconscious or worse inside the motel room. The operation had gone catastrophically wrong, and Snake was forced to consider the possibility that they were outmatched by their target's professional military training. "This is Snake," he transmitted to Rico. "Abort mission. We're pulling back." But Rico's response was interrupted by the wail of police sirens in the distance, approaching rapidly from multiple directions. Someone had reported the gunfire, and the Los Angeles Police Department was responding in force to what appeared to be a major incident at the Sunset Inn. Marcus heard the sirens and knew that his situation was about to become exponentially more complicated. He was standing in a motel room with two dead bodies, a wounded intruder, and a smoking gun in his hand. Explaining the circumstances to arriving police officers would require careful handling to avoid being charged with multiple homicides. He quickly secured Kyle's knife and Jimmy's crowbar as evidence of the biker's hostile intent, then called 911 to report that he had been attacked by armed intruders and had defended himself. The dispatcher's questions were rapid-fire and professional, designed to gather essential information while emergency responders raced toward the scene. As red and blue lights began flashing outside his window, Marcus reflected on how dramatically his life had changed in the span of 36 hours. He had gone from being an unemployed veteran, seeking a fresh start, to being a survivor of multiple assassination attempts by organized criminals. The job interview and community barbecue seemed like events from another lifetime. The real question was whether the legal system would recognize his right to self-defense or treat him as a dangerous vigilante who had escalated a minor traffic dispute into a deadly confrontation spanning multiple states. Either way, his quiet plans for a new beginning in Los Angeles had been shattered by men who couldn't accept that sometimes the wrong person becomes your enemy. Detective Lieutenant Maria Hernandez arrived at the Sunset Inn just as the Los Angeles Police Department's SWAT team finished securing the perimeter around room 127. At 43, she had spent 15 years working violent crimes in one of America's most challenging urban environments. But the scene that awaited her was unusual, even by LA standards. The motel room looked like a war zone, with bullet holes in the walls, blood spatter across multiple surfaces, and two bodies sprawled among the wreckage of what had clearly been an intense firefight. Marcus Wheeler sat in the back of an ambulance, his hands zip-tied behind his back while a paramedic cleaned superficial cuts from flying debris. Despite being outnumbered 4-1 in a confined space, he appeared remarkably composed for someone who had just survived a coordinated assassination attempt. His military bearing was unmistakable, from his straight posture to the way his eyes continuously tracked potential threats in his peripheral vision. "Mr. Wheeler," Detective Hernandez began, settling into a folding chair that had been positioned to allow for a preliminary interview. "I'm going to read you your rights, and then I'd like to hear your version of what happened here tonight." Marcus listened to the Miranda warning with the patience of someone who understood that cooperation with law enforcement was essential to his long-term survival. When Detective Hernandez finished, he nodded his understanding and began providing a detailed account of the events that had led to the deadly confrontation. "It started yesterday morning at a gas station in Nevada," Marcus explained, his voice steady despite the emotional weight of the past 36 hours. "A member of the Desert Reapers Motorcycle Club tried to intimidate me, then escalated to brandishing a weapon when I didn't back down. I defended myself and left the scene, thinking that was the end of it." Detective Hernandez took notes while Marcus described the highway pursuit, the rest area confrontation, and Kyle's hospitalization in Las Vegas. Her expression remained professionally neutral, but she was privately impressed by the level of detail and tactical awareness that Marcus displayed in recounting the incidents. "So you drove to Los Angeles for a job interview, unaware that these bikers were tracking you?" she asked. "Correct. I had no idea they had the resources or contacts to follow me across state lines. When I returned to my room tonight, I detected signs that someone had tampered with the lock and planted surveillance equipment inside. That's when I realized the situation was more serious than a simple road rage incident." The physical evidence supported Marcus's account of the evening's events. The wireless transmitter found in his room was sophisticated enough to require significant financial resources, suggesting organized criminal involvement rather than random violence. The weapons recovered from the scene included Kyle's pistol, which matched the description Marcus had provided to Nevada authorities, and Ghost's sawed-off shotgun, which was illegal under federal firearm statutes. Jimmy Morrison had been transported to UCLA Medical Center with a shoulder wound that would require extensive surgery but was not life-threatening. Under questioning, he had provided information about the Desert Reapers' organizational structure and their decision to pursue Marcus to California for revenge. His cooperation was motivated partly by a desire to avoid additional charges and partly by genuine fear of what Snake might do to eliminate potential witnesses. Kyle Bradshaw remained unconscious in the intensive care unit at the same hospital, suffering from severe concussion and possible brain trauma from Marcus's defensive strike. Medical personnel weren't certain when or if he would regain consciousness, and the extent of any permanent neurological damage remained unknown. Snake Castellanos and Rico Valdez had escaped the scene before police arrived, abandoning their motorcycles in a parking garage 6 blocks away and fleeing in a stolen vehicle. An all-points bulletin had been issued for both men, but they had vanished into Los Angeles's sprawling urban landscape with the skill of experienced fugitives. As the preliminary investigation continued through the night, Detective Hernandez found herself developing a grudging respect for Marcus's handling of an impossible situation. The evidence clearly showed that he had been the target of a coordinated attack by armed criminals, and his response had been proportionate to the threat he faced. More importantly, his immediate call to 911 and voluntary cooperation with investigators suggested someone with nothing to hide. "Mr. Wheeler," she said after reviewing her notes, "I'm going to recommend that the district attorney's office treat this as a clear case of self-defense. You were attacked in your own motel room by multiple armed assailants, and you responded with reasonable force to protect your life." Marcus felt a wave of relief that he hadn't realized he was carrying. "Thank you, Detective. I know the situation looks complicated from the outside." "It's not that complicated," Detective Hernandez replied. "Bad guys attacked a good guy, and the good guy won. The only complicated part is the paperwork." Dawn was breaking over Los Angeles as Marcus finally walked out of the police station, legally cleared of any wrongdoing, but emotionally drained by the night's events. The rental truck company had already been notified about the damage to their vehicle, and arrangements had been made for a replacement that would allow him to return to Nevada to collect his belongings. But as Marcus stood on the steps of the police station, watching the city come alive with morning traffic and bustling pedestrians, he realized that he no longer wanted to return to his old life in Reno. The confrontation with the Desert Reapers had crystallized something important about his character and his future. He was tired of running from challenges, and he was ready to build something meaningful in Los Angeles. Colonel Patricia Hayes had been contacted by police during the investigation, and she had driven to the station at 4 o'clock in the morning to provide character references for her newest employee. Her faith in Marcus had been vindicated by his handling of the crisis, and she had formally extended the job offer despite the unusual circumstances of his arrival in the city. "Most people would be traumatized by what you've been through," she told Marcus as they walked toward her car in the police parking lot. "But you seem remarkably composed for someone who just survived multiple assassination attempts." "The military teaches you to compartmentalize," Marcus replied. "Deal with the immediate threat first, process the emotional impact later. Right now, I'm focused on starting over and making sure those bikers can't hurt anyone else, the veterans." Transition Center provided Marcus with temporary housing in a furnished apartment that the organization maintained for staff members who were relocating to Los Angeles. The space was modest but comfortable, and it represented the first stable living situation he had enjoyed since leaving the army. More importantly, it was clean and secure, with no history of violence or criminal intrusion. 3 weeks later, Marcus had settled into his new role as a counselor and case manager at the center. His experience with the Desert Reapers had given him additional credibility with veterans who were struggling with their own demons. If he could survive a coordinated attack by organized criminals, he could certainly help them navigate the challenges of civilian life. Robert, the Marine who had lost his leg in Iraq, became one of Marcus's first success stories. Through patient counseling and practical assistance, Marcus helped him overcome his depression and find employment with a construction company that valued his mechanical skills and military work ethic. The transformation was remarkable, as Robert progressed from a bitter, isolated individual to someone who was actively rebuilding his life. Sarah, the Army medic with severe PTSD, required more intensive intervention. Marcus connected her with specialized therapy programs while providing the kind of practical support that only another combat veteran could offer. His own experiences with hypervigilance and emotional numbing gave him insights that traditional therapists sometimes missed. David, the Navy SEAL who couldn't maintain civilian employment, presented a different set of challenges. His military skills were so specialized that finding equivalent civilian work was nearly impossible, but Marcus helped him transition into private security work that utilized his training while providing stable income and clear advancement opportunities. Each success reinforced Marcus's conviction that he had found his true calling in helping other veterans overcome the obstacles that had nearly derailed his own transition to civilian life. The work was emotionally demanding but deeply satisfying, providing the sense of purpose and mission that he had been missing since leaving the army. Snake, Castellanos, and Rico Valdez remained fugitives from justice, though federal authorities had added them to wanted lists for interstate transportation of stolen vehicles and conspiracy to commit murder. The FBI's Organized Crime Task Force was actively investigating the Desert Reapers' operations in Nevada, using information provided by Jimmy Morrison to build cases against other club members. Kyle Bradshaw eventually regained consciousness after 6 weeks in a medically induced coma, but the brain damage from Marcus's defensive strike had permanently altered his personality and cognitive abilities. He would never again be capable of the kind of organized violence that had defined his criminal career, though his memory of the confrontation remained intact enough to fuel continued fantasies of revenge. Jimmy Morrison was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison after pleading guilty to charges related to the motel room assault and providing information about the Desert Reaper's other criminal activities. His cooperation with authorities had earned him a reduced sentence, but it had also made him a marked man within the prison system where motorcycle club members commanded significant influence. The investigation into the Desert Reaper's operations eventually led to the indictment of 17 club members on charges ranging from drug trafficking to murder. The organization's Nevada compound was raided by federal agents, who discovered an extensive arsenal of weapons and evidence of criminal activities spanning multiple states. Ghost Sullivan's death marked the end of one of the most feared enforcers in the Southwest's outlaw motorcycle community. His funeral was attended by hundreds of bikers from affiliated clubs, but the message was clear. Even the most dangerous criminals were vulnerable when they chose the wrong target. 6 months after the motel room confrontation, Marcus received a phone call from Detective Hernandez, informing him that Snake Castellanos had been arrested in Phoenix after a traffic stop revealed outstanding warrants. The Desert Reaper's president would face federal charges that could result in life imprisonment, effectively ending his criminal career and dismantling the organization he had built. "Thought you'd want to know that the last of them is off the streets," Detective Hernandez said. "You can finally stop looking over your shoulder." Marcus thanked her for the update, but privately he knew that his hypervigilance would never completely disappear. Combat veterans learn to live with a certain level of tactical awareness, and his confrontation with the Desert Reapers had reinforced lessons that would stay with him for the rest of his life. The Veterans Transition Center thrived under Marcus's involvement, expanding its programs and serving increasing numbers of former military personnel who needed assistance with civilian life. His reputation within the veteran community grew as word spread about his effectiveness in helping others overcome seemingly insurmountable challenges. Dr. Amanda Foster often collaborated with Marcus on complex cases, and their professional relationship gradually developed into something deeper. She was impressed by his dedication to helping others despite his own traumatic experiences, while he appreciated her clinical expertise and genuine compassion for veteran issues. Colonel Hayes eventually promoted Marcus to assistant director of the center, recognizing his unique combination of practical experience and intuitive understanding of veteran psychology. The position came with increased responsibilities and a salary that allowed him to purchase a small house in a quiet neighborhood near the center. 2 years after the confrontation that had changed his life, Marcus stood in the parking lot of the last stop gas station in Nevada, having returned to the scene where everything began. He was driving his own vehicle now, a reliable sedan that reflected his stable employment and renewed sense of purpose. The gas station looked exactly the same, its weathered sign still promising fuel and refreshments to travelers crossing the desert. Casey, the teenage clerk with purple hair, was still working behind the counter, though she now carried herself with the confidence of someone who had survived her own challenges and emerged stronger. She recognized Marcus immediately and greeted him with genuine warmth. "Hey, you're that guy who had trouble with those bikers," she said. "I heard about what happened in LA. Glad you came through it okay." Marcus smiled and nodded, appreciating her simple acknowledgement of the shared experience. "Just wanted to stop by and see how you were doing. That day was pretty intense for everyone involved." "Those guys never came back," Casey reported. "Word got around about what happened to them, and I think it scared off some of the other troublemakers who used to hassle customers. You kind of cleaned up our neighborhood problem." As Marcus filled his tank and prepared to continue his journey, he reflected on the unexpected ways that a single moment of confrontation had shaped multiple lives. His refusal to be intimidated by Kyle Bradshaw had set in motion a chain of events that led to the dismantling of a criminal organization, his own discovery of meaningful work, and a new sense of purpose that extended far beyond personal survival. The desert highway stretched endlessly in both directions, just as it had 2 years earlier, but Marcus was no longer the same man who had stopped for gas and inadvertently triggered a war with the Desert Reapers. He had found his place in the world, surrounded by people who valued his contributions and depended on his expertise. His phone buzzed with a text message from Dr. Foster, reminding him about a dinner reservation they had made for that evening. The message was accompanied by a photo of a new veteran who had arrived at the center that morning, a young woman who looked lost and frightened in the way that Marcus remembered from his own early days of civilian transition. Marcus smiled as he typed back his response, confirming the dinner plans and promising to meet with the new client first thing Monday morning. Tomorrow was Sunday, which meant he would attend the weekly barbecue at the center, helping other veterans connect with resources and support systems that could change their lives. The circle was complete. The man who had once been adrift in civilian life had found his anchor in helping others navigate the same treacherous waters. The Desert Reapers had intended to destroy him, but instead they had inadvertently guided him toward his true calling. As Marcus drove away from the last stop gas station for what would probably be the final time, he carried with him the knowledge that sometimes the most important battles are the ones we never intended to fight. His victory over the Desert Reapers had been complete and decisive, but his real triumph was the life he had built in the aftermath of that confrontation. The highway ahead led toward Los Angeles, toward the Veterans Transition Center, toward the work that gave his life meaning and the relationships that made it worth living. Behind him, the desert stretched toward the horizon, holding memories of violence and fear that had been transformed into sources of strength and purpose. Marcus Wheeler had learned that sometimes the wrong enemy becomes exactly the right catalyst for discovering who you really are and what you're truly capable of achieving. The Desert Reapers had taught him that lesson in the most brutal way possible, but the knowledge had been worth the price he paid to acquire it. The sun was setting behind him as he drove toward his new life, casting long shadows across the road, but illuminating the path ahead with golden light that promised better days to come. The FBI field office in Los Angeles had become an unexpected second home for Marcus during the months following the motel confrontation. Special Agent Jennifer Walsh, who headed the organized crime task force investigating the Desert Reapers, had recruited Marcus as a consultant due to his first-hand knowledge of the club's operations and tactics. His military background and direct experience with their methods made him invaluable in understanding how the organization functioned. Agent Walsh was a 20-year veteran of federal law enforcement who had specialized in dismantling criminal enterprises throughout the southwestern United States. Her investigation into the Desert Reapers had begun months before Marcus's confrontation with Kyle, but his survival of their assassination attempt had provided the breakthrough evidence needed to secure federal indictments. "Your case was the missing piece," Agent Walsh explained during one of their consultation sessions. "We had suspected the Desert Reapers of interstate criminal activity, but proving it required evidence of their willingness to cross state lines for violent crimes. When they followed you to California and attempted murder, they handed us exactly what we needed. The federal investigation had uncovered a vast criminal network that extended far beyond the Nevada-based motorcycle club. The Desert Reapers maintained connections with similar organizations throughout Arizona, California, and Utah, facilitating drug trafficking, weapons smuggling, and contract violence across multiple states. Their downfall had created opportunities to dismantle affiliated groups that had operated with impunity for decades. Marcus's testimony before a federal grand jury was crucial in securing indictments against 17 Desert Reapers members and associates. His detailed account of the highway pursuit, rest area confrontation, and motel room assault provided prosecutors with the narrative framework needed to demonstrate a pattern of escalating criminal violence. The legal proceedings attracted significant media attention, with several news outlets describing Marcus as a hero veteran who had single-handedly destroyed a major criminal organization. He found the publicity uncomfortable, preferring to focus on his work at the Veterans Transition Center rather than reliving the trauma of his confrontation with the bikers. Dr. Amanda Foster proved invaluable in helping Marcus process the psychological aftermath of the violent encounters. Their professional relationship had evolved into something deeper as she provided both clinical expertise and personal support during the challenging months of legal proceedings and media scrutiny. Survivor's guilt is common among combat veterans, Dr. Foster explained during one of their sessions. You feel responsible for the deaths and injuries that resulted from defending yourself, even though your actions were completely justified. Marcus appreciated her understanding of the complex emotions that accompanied his survival of the assassination attempts. The rational part of his mind knew that he had acted appropriately in defending himself against armed attackers, but the emotional impact of taking lives in civilian circumstances was difficult to reconcile with his military training. The Veterans Transition Center had become something of a pilgrimage site for former military personnel who had heard about Marcus's story through veteran networks and social media. Many came seeking his personal guidance, believing that someone who had survived such extreme circumstances would have unique insights into overcoming their own challenges. Among the new arrivals was Lieutenant Colonel James Patterson, a career Air Force officer who had been medically retired after suffering severe injuries in a helicopter crash in Afghanistan. Patterson's physical recovery had been successful, but he struggled with depression and survivor's guilt over the deaths of his aircrew members. I keep thinking I should have done something different, Patterson confided during his interview with Marcus. Maybe if I had been a better pilot or made different decisions, those men would still be alive. Marcus recognized the psychological patterns that were destroying Patterson's ability to function in civilian life. The former pilot was trapped in an endless cycle of second-guessing decisions that had been made under impossible circumstances, holding himself to standards of perfection that no human could achieve. Combat situations don't offer perfect choices, Marcus replied. They offer split-second decisions with incomplete information and life-or-death consequences. Your aircrew members knew the risks when they volunteered for military service, just like you did. Their sacrifice has meaning, but it's not your burden to carry it alone. Working with Patterson and dozens of other veterans reinforced Marcus's understanding of the unique challenges facing former military personnel in civilian society. The transition from a structured military environment to the ambiguous civilian world created psychological stress that manifested in numerous ways: depression, anxiety, substance abuse, relationship problems, and employment difficulties. Success stories were balanced by heartbreaking failures. Marcus lost 3 clients to suicide during his first year at the center, despite his best efforts to provide them with support and resources. Each loss reinforced his determination to improve the center's programs and reach more veterans before their situations became hopeless. Colonel Hayes recognized Marcus's growing expertise in veteran psychology and encouraged him to pursue formal education in counseling and social work. The center provided tuition assistance for staff members seeking advanced degrees, and Marcus enrolled in a master's program at UCLA that allowed him to maintain his full-time position while attending evening classes. His academic studies complemented his practical experience, providing theoretical frameworks for understanding the interventions that he had developed intuitively through his work with veterans. The combination of scholarly knowledge and real-world application made him increasingly effective as both a counselor and administrator. The Desert Reaper's criminal trial began 18 months after the motel room confrontation, with Marcus serving as the prosecution's star witness. His testimony was delivered with military precision, providing detailed accounts of each encounter while maintaining the emotional composure that impressed both the jury and court observers. Defense attorneys attempted to portray Marcus as a dangerous vigilante who had escalated minor traffic disputes into deadly confrontations, but the evidence contradicted their narrative. Security camera footage from the gas station clearly showed Kyle's aggressive behavior, while the weapons recovered from the motel room demonstrated the biker's intent to commit serious violence. Snake Castellanos was ultimately sentenced to life, imprisonment without the possibility of parole, convicted on charges of conspiracy to commit murder, interstate transportation of stolen vehicles, and racketeering. His conviction effectively ended the Desert Reapers as a functioning criminal organization, with remaining members either imprisoned or scattered to other clubs. Rico Valdez received a 30-year sentence after his capture in Arizona, where he had attempted to establish a new criminal operation with former Desert Reapers associates. Jimmy Morrison's cooperation with federal authorities earned him a reduced sentence of 12 years, though his reputation as an informant made his eventual release uncertain. Kyle Bradshaw's brain damage proved permanent, leaving him institutionalized in a state facility for individuals with traumatic brain injuries. His family attempted to file a civil lawsuit against Marcus, but the case was dismissed when courts ruled that his injuries resulted from his own criminal actions rather than excessive force. The legal vindication allowed Marcus to focus completely on his work at the Veterans Transition Center without the distraction of ongoing litigation. His reputation within the veteran community continued to grow, and he began receiving speaking invitations from military bases, veteran organizations, and academic institutions throughout the country. His presentations focused on the practical aspects of veteran transition rather than the dramatic details of his confrontation with the Desert Reapers. He emphasized the importance of finding purpose and community in civilian life, using his own journey from unemployed drifter to successful counselor as an example of the possibilities available to former military personnel. Dr. Foster accompanied Marcus to many of these speaking engagements, providing clinical perspective on the psychological aspects of veteran transition. Their professional partnership had evolved into a personal relationship that provided both of them with the stability and emotional support needed for their demanding work. 3 years after his arrival in Los Angeles, Marcus proposed to Dr. Foster during a quiet dinner at the restaurant where they had shared their first date. The engagement was celebrated by their colleagues at the Veterans Transition Center, many of whom had watched their relationship develop from professional respect to deep personal commitment. Their wedding was held in the center's garden, with Colonel Hayes officiating and dozens of veterans attending as guests. Robert, the Marine who had been Marcus's first major success story, served as best man, having overcome his depression and built a successful construction business that employed several other disabled veterans. The ceremony was simple but meaningful, reflecting the couple's shared commitment to serving others rather than pursuing personal aggrandizement. Their honeymoon was spent visiting veteran service organizations throughout the Pacific Northwest, learning about innovative approaches to transition assistance that could be implemented at their own center. Marcus's graduate studies culminated in a master's thesis examining the effectiveness of peer counseling programs for combat veterans with post-traumatic stress disorder. His research demonstrated that veterans who received support from other former military personnel showed significantly better outcomes than those who relied solely on civilian therapists. The thesis was published in several professional journals and became required reading in graduate programs throughout the country. Marcus's academic credentials, combined with his practical experience and media profile, established him as a nationally recognized expert in veteran transition issues. The Veterans Transition Center expanded significantly under his leadership, opening satellite offices in 3 other California cities and serving more than 2,000 veterans annually. Federal grants and private donations funded new programs addressing homelessness, substance abuse, and employment training specifically designed for former military personnel. Casey from the Last Stop gas station visited Marcus in Los Angeles during her college spring break, having used the scholarship money she had earned through academic achievement to pursue a degree in social work. Her transformation from a frightened teenager working in a dangerous environment to a confident young woman preparing for a career in helping others reflected the positive ripple effects that could result from individual acts of courage. "That day changed everything for me," she told Marcus during their reunion. "Seeing you stand up to those bullies made me realize that I didn't have to accept being victimized by people like that. It inspired me to get out of that situation and build something better." Her story reminded Marcus that his confrontation with the Desert Reapers had affected more lives than he had initially realized. The removal of the motorcycle club's intimidating presence from the highway corridor had improved safety for countless travelers who would never know his name or understand his sacrifice. The ripple effects continued to expand as veterans who had been helped by the center went on to successful civilian careers and began helping others in their communities. Many became advocates for veteran issues, using their own experiences to promote better understanding of military service and its aftermath. Marcus's own story became part of the center's training materials, not for its dramatic elements, but for its demonstration that seemingly insurmountable challenges could be transformed into opportunities for growth and service. New staff members learned from his example that professional expertise combined with personal experience could create powerful tools for helping others overcome trauma and adversity. As evening approached on his return journey from Nevada, Marcus reflected on the unexpected path that had led him from an unemployed veteran with no clear purpose to a nationally recognized leader in veteran services. The Desert Reapers had intended to destroy him, but their attacks had instead revealed strengths and capabilities that he hadn't known he possessed. The future stretched ahead with unlimited possibilities for expanding the center's impact and reaching more veterans who needed assistance with civilian transition. Dr. Foster was pregnant with their first child, a development that would add new dimensions to their shared commitment to building something meaningful and lasting. The highway signs indicated that Los Angeles was only 50 miles ahead, where the Veterans Transition Center waited with its mission of transformation and hope. Marcus accelerated slightly, eager to return to the work that had given his life meaning and the relationships that made every challenge worthwhile. Behind him, the desert held memories of violence and fear that had been transformed into sources of strength and wisdom. The confrontation that had nearly destroyed him had ultimately become the foundation for everything that mattered most in his rebuilt life. The circle was complete, but the story continued with each new veteran who walked through the center's doors seeking help and finding hope. Marcus Wheeler had discovered that sometimes The most important victories are won not through violence, but through the patient work of helping others overcome their own battles with purpose and dignity. 5 years after that fateful morning at the last stop gas station, Marcus stood before a congressional subcommittee in Washington, D.C., testifying about the critical need for improved veteran transition services. His reputation as both a survivor and an advocate had reached the highest levels of government, where lawmakers struggled to address the growing crisis of veteran suicide and homelessness. Congressman William Foster, chairman of the House Veterans Affairs Subcommittee, had specifically requested Marcus's testimony after reading his published research on peer counseling effectiveness. The congressman's own son had served 3 tours in Iraq before taking his own life 6 months after discharge, making veteran issues deeply personal for the legislative leader. "Mr. Wheeler," Congressman Foster began, his voice heavy with the weight of personal loss, "your work suggests that traditional therapeutic approaches may be less effective for combat veterans than peer-to-peer counseling. Can you explain why that might be the case?" Marcus leaned forward to the microphone, his military bearing evident even in civilian clothes. "Congressman, combat veterans share experiences that are difficult for civilians to understand, no matter how well trained they might be as therapists. When a veteran talks to someone who has never been under fire, there's an invisible barrier that prevents complete communication. Peer counselors eliminate that barrier because they've walked the same path." The hearing room was packed with veteran advocates, family members, and congressional staff who listened intently as Marcus described the innovative programs that had transformed the Veterans Transition Center into a model for organizations nationwide. His testimony was supported by comprehensive statistics showing dramatic improvements in veteran employment rates, housing stability, and mental health outcomes. Senator Patricia Chen from California, herself a Navy veteran, questioned Marcus about the financial sustainability of expanded peer counseling programs. Her concerns reflected the broader congressional struggle to balance veteran needs with budgetary constraints that limited federal spending on social services. "The initial investment in peer counseling programs is significant," Marcus acknowledged, "but the long-term savings are enormous. Every veteran suicide costs society an estimated $1.3 million in lost productivity, medical expenses, and family support. Every homeless veteran requires approximately $50,000 annually in emergency services and law enforcement interventions. Successful transition programs eliminate these costs while transforming veterans into productive taxpayers." His economic arguments resonated with fiscally conservative committee members who had been skeptical about expanding veteran programs. Marcus's ability to frame humanitarian concerns in terms of cost-benefit analysis reflected his growing sophistication as a policy advocate who understood the political realities of federal legislation. The committee hearing was broadcast on C-SPAN and attracted significant media attention, with several major news outlets featuring stories about Marcus's journey from confronting motorcycle criminals to influencing national veteran policy. The coverage helped raise public awareness about veteran transition challenges while promoting the peer counseling model that had proven so effective in Los Angeles. Dr. Amanda Foster watched the hearing from their home in Pasadena, their 18-month-old daughter Sarah playing at her feet while she balanced her laptop and prepared for her own afternoon testimony before a medical association conference. The family's dual careers in veteran services had made them something of a power couple within the advocacy community. Their daughter Sarah had been born with the strong constitution and alert intelligence that suggested she might follow her parents into careers serving others. Marcus often joked that she had inherited his tactical awareness, noting how she systematically explored every environment and seemed to evaluate potential threats with unusual sophistication for a toddler. The Veterans Transition Center had grown into a national organization with affiliated programs in 12 states, serving more than 8,000 veterans annually through a combination of direct services and training partnerships with local organizations. Marcus's role had evolved from hands-on counselor to executive director, though he insisted on maintaining direct contact with clients to stay grounded in the practical realities of veteran transition. The center's success had attracted attention from international organizations dealing with similar challenges among former military personnel. Delegations from Canada, Australia, and the United Kingdom had visited Los Angeles to study the peer counseling model, leading to pilot programs that adapted American innovations to different cultural contexts. Marcus had travelled to London the previous year to consult with the British Ministry of Defence about implementing peer support programs for soldiers returning from Afghanistan deployments. The experience of working with international partners had broadened his perspective on veteran issues while reinforcing his belief that former military personnel shared common challenges regardless of nationality. The financial success of the Veterans Transition Center had enabled Marcus and Amanda to establish a private foundation dedicated to supporting innovative approaches to veteran mental health treatment. The Wheeler Foster Foundation provided seed funding for experimental programs that traditional sources might consider too risky or unproven. One of their most successful investments had been a wilderness therapy program in Colorado that used outdoor challenges to help veterans rebuild confidence and camaraderie. The program combined adventure activities with group counseling sessions, creating an environment where former military personnel could process trauma while developing new coping skills. Another foundation initiative supported a technology startup, developing virtual reality applications for treating post-traumatic stress disorder. The immersive technology allowed therapists to gradually expose veterans to triggering situations in controlled environments, helping them develop healthier responses to trauma-related stimuli. Marcus's academic credentials had continued to grow through his work with UCLA's School of Social Welfare, where he taught graduate courses in trauma counseling and veteran advocacy. His classroom combined theoretical knowledge with practical case studies drawn from his extensive experience, providing students with realistic preparation for careers in veteran services. His most popular course, Combat Trauma and Civilian Transition, attracted students from multiple disciplines who recognized the growing importance of understanding military culture in fields ranging from social work to criminal justice. Many graduates went on to establish their own veteran service organizations or to work with existing programs throughout the country. The Desert Reapers had become a cautionary tale within law enforcement circles, used as an example of how criminal organizations could be dismantled through coordinated federal investigations supported by witness testimony. FBI training programs featured Marcus's case as a model for how civilian cooperation could provide the evidence needed to prosecute complex criminal enterprises. Agent Jennifer Walsh had been promoted to head the FBI's Organized Crime Division, partly based on her successful prosecution of the Desert Reapers case. She maintained contact with Marcus through his consulting work, often seeking his insights into criminal psychology and victim advocacy approaches. The Last Stop gas station had been purchased by a veteran-owned business consortium that transformed it into a modern travel center with expanded services and improved security. Casey, now a licensed social worker, managed a small counseling office within the facility that provided crisis intervention services for travelers in distress. The travel center had become an unofficial pilgrimage site for veterans who had heard Marcus's story and wanted to see where his transformation began. Casey kept a guest book where visitors could leave messages of support and share their own stories of overcoming adversity. Kyle Bradshaw remained in institutional care, his brain damage having progressed to the point where he required constant supervision. His family had eventually accepted the reality of his condition and focused on ensuring that he received appropriate medical treatment rather than pursuing futile legal challenges. Snake Castellanos had died in federal prison 3 years into his life sentence, killed by members of a rival criminal organization who viewed the Desert Reapers' collapse as an opportunity to eliminate potential competition. His death marked the final end of the motorcycle club that had once terrorized Nevada's highway corridors. Jimmy Morrison had been released after serving 8 years of his sentence, but his cooperation with federal authorities had made him unemployable within criminal circles. He eventually found work as a mechanic at a legitimate motorcycle dealership, using his technical skills in an environment that didn't require the violence that had defined his earlier life. The broader impact of the Desert Reapers' destruction had been felt throughout the Southwest's criminal underworld, where other outlaw motorcycle clubs modified their operations to avoid the kind of federal attention that had destroyed their Nevada counterparts. The case had demonstrated that even well-established criminal organizations were vulnerable to determined law enforcement efforts. Marcus's influence extended beyond veteran services into broader discussions about criminal justice reform and victim advocacy. His testimony had been instrumental in securing passage of federal legislation that provided enhanced protections for witnesses in organized crime cases, ensuring that others who found themselves in similar situations would receive adequate support. Tika's congressional hearing concluded with unanimous committee approval of legislation that would provide federal funding for peer counseling programs at veteran service organizations nationwide. The bill was expected to pass both houses of Congress with bipartisan support, representing a significant victory for the veteran advocacy community. As Marcus left the Capitol building and walked toward his hotel, he reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought him from a gas station confrontation in the Nevada desert to the halls of Congress. The transformation seemed almost impossible to believe, yet each step had followed logically from the previous one. His phone buzzed with a text message from Amanda, accompanied by a photo of their daughter taking her first tentative steps across their living room. The image reminded him that his most important role was not as a policy advocate or organizational leader, but as a father responsible for shaping the next generation. The flight back to Los Angeles gave Marcus time to prepare for the following week's activities at the Veterans Transition Center. 3 new staff members were starting on Monday, including a Marine Corps veteran who had overcome homelessness through the center's programs and now wanted to help others facing similar challenges. The center's waiting list had grown to more than 200 veterans seeking services, a testament to both the program's reputation and the ongoing need for specialized transition assistance. Marcus had been working with Colonel Hayes to develop expansion plans that would double their capacity within 18 months. The airplane descended through the smog layer that perpetually shrouded Los Angeles, revealing the sprawling urban landscape that had become Marcus's permanent home. The city's energy and diversity continued to appeal to him, providing the kind of dynamic environment where innovative programs could thrive and grow. As the plane touched down at LAX, Marcus smiled at the thought of reuniting with his family and returning to the work that gave his life meaning. The confrontation with the Desert Reapers had ended years ago, but its positive consequences continued to ripple outward through countless lives that had been touched by the programs and policies that emerged from his survival. The veteran who had once drifted aimlessly through Nevada's desert towns had become a national leader whose influence extended far beyond his own experience. The transformation was complete, but the mission continued, with each new day bringing opportunities to serve others and honor the sacrifice of those who had served their country. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new veterans seeking help. With their own transitions from military to civilian life, Marcus Wheeler was ready for whatever came next, confident in his purpose and grateful for the unexpected path that had led him to discover his true calling in the service of others. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.